So, in addition to writing fiction and nonfiction and teaching, I am a contributing editor for Writer's Digest books. I do a lot of presentations, and I love interviewing luminaries in the writing, editorial, and publishing field. And now it is my great honor to introduce you to one of my heroes, Jane Friedman. Jane is, she's a force of nature. She's incredible. She's had decades of experience in the publishing industry with a focus on business writing and author education. She is featured in major media outlets: the New York Times, The Atlantic, Today Show, Wired, Fox News, BBC. Her impact on publishing education spans multiple forms, multiple audiences, including her book, which the second edition has just been released, The Business of Being a Writer. And of course, we'll be talking more about that. But it's important to know it's used as a classroom text in many writing and publishing programs. She reaches thousands through her speaking engagements. She runs webinars. It's been my honor and privilege to participate in some of those webinars. She's spoken at the Frankfurt Book Fair, New York University's Advanced Publishing Institute, among numerous other important events. She's done curriculum development for MFA programs. She's taught at the university level. She's worked with Writer's Digest, Virginia Quarterly, Chicago Manual of Style. That's what St. Martin's, my mystery publisher, that's what they use. I think that's what most of them use. And I'm going to stop there, other than to say she has two important industry newsletters: Electric Speed, which has been published since 2009 and reaches more than 30,000 subscribers, while The Bottom Line serves as an industry beacon for more than 4,000 publishing professionals. And this, I mean, think about what I'm about to tell you. In collaboration with the Authors Guild, she authored the Authors Guild Guide to Self-Publishing. She is the leading voice in publishing. I guess I should probably say she's one of them, but I'm not going to equivocate. She is the leading voice. And in 2023, she was named Publishing Commentator of the Year by Digital Book World. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
And I'm going to start by asking you to give us an overview on the current state of publishing.
No small topic.
Yeah, I mean, 20 words or less.
Well, I would say that the number one issue at the moment is that romance and romantasy are dominating a lot of the sales, interest, media coverage, and discussion. I imagine many of you have heard of the authors known as Rebecca Yarros, Sarah J. Maas, Colleen Hoover, although Colleen Hoover I wouldn't classify as romantasy, but romance and romantasy have been leading trends now, I would say, for at least the last 5 years. And I find that interesting because fiction had been on a bit of a soft decline going into the pandemic, but the pandemic changed a lot of things. And I'm not saying it's solely responsible for the comeback of fiction, but certainly fiction has been doing really well ever since 2020, and it just keeps growing, particularly in the romance genre. On the flip side, though, the thing that frustrates nonfiction authors is that nonfiction has been quite soft. It really depends on which category you want to look at. There are some categories that continue to do really well. I would say the brightest spot relates to Christian living and inspirational titles. So, anyone in the audience who might be potentially working with Christian publishers or doing works that deal with Christian living, you're in a very good position. Even what we call the secular publishers, at least when we look at them from the perspective of the Christian houses. Even the secular publishers are opening up imprints that are devoted to what we might call Christian living types of titles. Andrews McMeel is the latest one. So that's very interesting. And then if you pull back even further from these particular sales trends, what you'll also see is that there's a lot of attention right now on TikTok and Book Talk because that has been really powerful in bringing discoverability to books, both old titles and new titles alike. Publishers are, in fact, starting to set up dedicated TikTok shops. So that means they can sell directly through TikTok. People don't have to leave the app in order to make a purchase. Hachette is just the latest publisher to do this. I think it's 2 of the big 5 New York houses now have TikTok shops. And so it's very interesting to see where that might go. Um, and then if I look on the self-publishing side, on the independent publishing side, what's happening there? If you look at any sort of bestseller list of self-published authors, those who are performing really well, almost all of them have literary agents. They tend to do deals with traditional publishers now that where they retain their digital rights, that would be like ebook rights, audiobook rights, and then they partner with the big publisher on print retail distribution and deluxe editions, perhaps. So that is something that's a trend that I really like because authors are not having to choose between one path or another. They're able to choose the right path for each book and partner with publishers where it makes sense. So in the past, if I go back 10 years, publishers' contracts tended to be less flexible, more restrictive. And now I think they're seeing how everyone can win when the authors are allowed to continue doing what they do well, to keep some of their rights, to keep some of their earnings potential, a lot of their earnings potential, or all of their earnings potential, while the publishers help in the areas where what they know best, which, let's be honest, as far as I'm concerned, that tends to be with like print distribution, making all sorts of deals with, let's say, international foreign players, although sometimes agents are facilitating those rights for them, and so on. Um, if I look at other issues that are impacting discussions in the industry, AI is a big one. I'm not going to delve into that at the moment, but we can always go in that direction if you wish. But I would say the 2 areas to definitely pay attention to in terms of the immediate effects of AI have to do with AI audiobooks, so synthetic voice narration, because Audible and Spotify both now accept AI narrated audiobooks. I don't think we're going to see a rush by publishers to do that for their top titles. That is not going to happen anytime soon. But certainly for backlist, for titles where it's not economical to do an audiobook, definitely they are starting to use these synthetic voices to facilitate audiobook availability. And I think it's a good thing for accessibility reasons, if for only accessibility reasons. And then the other area where it's starting to play a strong role is in translations. And that actually overlaps too with audiobooks because now a publisher could do an audiobook in English and then have AI then translate that into audiobook editions in other languages. So I think we're going to see that pick up tremendously over this year and of course going forward. So I'll pause there and then we can explore every
Wow.
facet of that.
You are just unbelievable. All right, I have about a million questions. Romance, all forms of romance. Uh,
I would say yes, all forms. I mean, romance, as anyone who writes romance knows, it is the genre of a million subgenres. There is a romance for every possible interest, community, niche,
from
all of it.
Amish to
Um,
cowboys to farmers to, yeah.
exactly. If I had to point to some, super popular areas at the moment, there's sports romance. So some of you may remember the hockey romance. There were some news stories about hockey romance. I think this might have been actually going back a couple years now, but it's still very popular. Formula One, like sport, race driving. Um, And really, it's interesting if you look at the trend lines of sports romance, the sales tend to peak with the sports season that we're in. So
Oh, that's
that's fun
funny.
to watch.
Yeah.
And then dark romance is trending, and that affects lots of different areas, lots of different subgenres. So it's not just that there's dark romance as its own subgenre, although I think there is, but darker aspects running across all sorts of subgenres
Can
there.
you define that? What is a darker romance?
Why don't I get the quote from the source because I want to make sure that I capture what they are seeing. So this particular trend was reported by Circana Bookscan. For those who don't know what that is, they track sales in the United States. They track print sales, ebook sales, digital book sales, but they're in slightly different ways. And so they just had a press release last week saying that let's see. So the fastest growing romance subjects are romantasy, as I suggested earlier, and sports romance. But one similarity they think among the top authors right now is dark romance, including paranormal and anti-hero themes. And they also see those themes affecting things like psychological thriller, dark fantasy, horror. For those who don't know, horror has seen a real uptick in the last few years with new imprints being launched in the horror segments in the horror category.
And what would anti-hero mean?
Oh gosh. I'm so bad at coming up with examples on the spot, but people who are not well, here's one. If anyone has seen the Last of Us TV series, that's in my mind because I was just watching it recently. The guy who's the protagonist there, I would call him probably an anti-hero. So they do bad things for good ends.
That's a great way to think about it. They do bad things for good ends. Good.
And I should add that Circana Bookscan, ties this into the zeitgeist, like the fact that um, let's say there's some negative emotions in society and culture right now. There's sadness, anger, anxiety, and so the the interpretation of this trend is that this allows an outlet for people to safely explore those negative emotions.
Interesting. You'd think that it would lead people to want lighter, fluffier things as opposed to delving deeper in.
It's still I would still categorize the books we're talking about as, let's say, escapist fiction.
Mm.
Um, so maybe it's that the dark escapist literature kind of like it fits or reflects part of what you're seeing in the world, but there is a satisfying conclusion where,
Mm.
at least in romance, where there's some sort of happily ever after even amidst the darkness.
Interesting. Very interesting. You mentioned that Hatchet was the second publisher to set up a TikTok shop. Who
That's
was
right.
number one?
I just had this conversation and I did because it was a conversation and not something I saw reported. I offer this with some hesitation, but I think it was HarperCollins.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment. My mother was a writer, and she made most of her living through writing Christian inspirational things.
Mhm.
And I'm going back 50 years or
Yeah,
more. And for Canadian publishers, just one of those random things. They're probably still around,
yeah,
you know. She made the other half of her money writing true romance. This first person,
yes,
I knew he was married, but I didn't care.
right, yes.
I found one once in the attic. I was about 12. And I said, Mother, what is this? She looked at it and said, That's the new stove.
Good answer.
Yeah, really. So, what should authors do to get published today?
Part of this depends on what sort of book we're talking about. So there is quite a divide between how authors land their first book deal when we're talking about fiction versus nonfiction. If it's a novel, I would say the most important thing, hands down, is writing the best novel possible, nailing the craft and technique. I don't think it's particularly wise to chase some of these trends that we've been discussing. That said, if you are just kind of like open, um, and you can be swayed and it sounds interesting to you, I would by all means gravitate toward the areas where there is the most demand. Certainly, I can say for genre fiction, that includes romance, romantasy, crime, suspense, thriller, mystery, science fiction, fantasy, all of the things that kind of that have the core organizations behind them. That's a really good rule of thumb, like the Romance Writers of America or the Mystery Writers of America. Those genres are always going to be with us. So it certainly helps if you're writing in one of those genres where there is always going to be a ready audience waiting for the next book or waiting for the next author to break out to deliver more of the stories that they love. So it really, in my mind, it really matters that you read thoroughly in that genre. You understand the conventions of it. You understand what it means to do something surprising. You understand what the audience expectations are. To me, that's kind of, those are the table stakes if you're going to get the book published. It helps if you can tie into something in the zeitgeist. If you want, if you want some extra consideration from agents and publishers because they'll look at it and say, oh, that's a great twist on what's happening in the world. And I think it's going to really pop in with reviewers or with media coverage. Right now, I mentioned TikTok and Book Talk have become really instrumental in book visibility, discoverability, driving sales. So I do hear agents and editors sometimes talk about whether or not the storyline has something that people will be getting excited about on TikTok. Like, are they going to be crying over this scene? Are they going to be throwing the book against the wall because of this plot twist? That sort of thing. Um, and really, again, it's really hard to like reverse engineer this or be overly calculated about it. But it certainly helps if you're writing commercial or genre fiction and you're thinking about how to break out to familiarize yourself with how readers react and respond in these spaces. We're definitely in a moment right now where tropes can make a big difference. Tropes are the things that where readers are like, I really want to read something with this sort of plot twist, like second chance romance, where couples try they're giving the relationship a second chance. It could be, much later in life, for example. Or enemies to lovers. The characters start out hating each other and they end up the lovers by the end. But I've just used romance, but there are tropes in everywhere. So understanding those tropes, it also just adds to, I think, your ability to appeal to readers. And I'm saying all this, with the, again, not to chase the trends, but to think about what sort of things can you build into the story that will help you market it once it comes on, once it releases, or that you can use in a query when you're pitching to agents and publishers.
Yeah, I
So
think
you,
I'm
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
I
You
think
you
you
go.
make two good points there. You have to write what your story. You have to want to write it. We're not machines, right?
Yeah,
And that having said that, to be mindful that it's going to be pitched to somebody and how that can work into the development of the story
right.
and adhering, reader expectations. I write about it all the time. I talk about it all the time. There are writers who write for themselves, and that's fine. Go and be well. But that's not commercial fiction.
Right.
And that's certainly my specialty is commercial fiction. Um, I, if I can, I want to hear rest of what you said, but I do have a question about TikTok. Do you think it's going to go away?
I don't. I understand the legal actions against TikTok. Um, and of course, for those who don't know, in the United States, Congress voted to ban the app unless it were sold to a US owned company. Once President Trump came into office, he extended the deadline for the sale and he has extended it yet again. I can't remember when the current deadline is, but I don't have a crystal ball, but it really feels to me like this app is not going to get banned, at least while President Trump is in office.
Too much money.
There is so much money wrapped up in that app.
Yes.
So will it eventually be sold to a US company? It seems that way, but it will take some time. And meanwhile, of course, there are other countries making their own decisions, but it is generally available. And because of the money, as you point out, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Thank you. Did you have other points you wanted to make about what writers should do to get published now? Or
Well,
shall I?
I
Yes,
can
please.
add a footnote for the nonfiction people. Um, You really do need a platform if you want a big New York publishing deal. So here I'm thinking about, Hachette, HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, Simon and Schuster, which you'll need an agent for. And the agents are evaluating nonfiction on the basis of your reach, your visibility to the intended readership of the book. So if you try to pitch a book with zero platform, it's not likely to go well for you if you're going the agent route. But there may be any number of university presses, small presses, independent publishers outside of New York that look at projects, evaluate them very differently. And I do have a chart at my site. It's called Key Book Publishing Paths. And this helps kind of delineate some of the options available. I say some, I mean, I try to cover them all, but there's always things that are in gray areas. But I try to cover the most significant opportunities both including the big five, smaller publishers, university publishers, professional publishers, and so on, so that people don't get they don't get stuck, especially on the nonfiction end, thinking, well, if I can't get an agent, then all of the doors are closed. That is not the case.
And how do you reach, for example, university publishers?
All they really want is a proposal from you, and sometimes the full manuscript. It depends on the press and the type of book. My book is published by the University of Chicago. I was able to sell that on the basis of a proposal. And so the proposal was peer reviewed. And then when I finished the manuscript, that was peer reviewed. And then the book was published after that. So I would say, especially for people doing things like essay collections, poetry collections, anthologies, some of these, you're really only going to be able to find either a nonprofit, small press to do it, or a university press if they have a tradition of publishing literary work. Some do, some don't. It's really a matter of researching them to see, because every single university is different in terms of what it wants to publish.
Got it. Yeah. Tell us about your book.
So the book is in its second edition, The Business of Being a Writer, and I revised it not only because times have changed and a lot of the details and facts were getting long in the tooth. Uh, it's when you talk about Facebook and Twitter, and like I wrote that first edition in 2016, talking about Facebook and Twitter in 2016 is very different than talking about them in 2025. So those details really needed a refresh. And I tried to write the book in such a way that it's not going to go out of date 2 seconds after it's published. So I reined in a lot of the specific social media guidance because I just don't think it gets stale very fast. But there was also a bigger reason for revision that had to do with my own thinking about the industry and how to guide writers through the business decisions they'd be making. And one of the big changes I made is I put in a whole part up front, part two, on platform development. Now, I mentioned that platform development is really important for nonfiction authors, but ultimately it affects novelists' ability to market and promote once the book releases. Probably isn't going to affect your ability to get a deal if you've got a great story, because the decision is made on the quality of the story or manuscript. But once the book is released and you haven't done a single thing to help support that book, uh, it's going to be tough going. And so that section of the book kind of breaks down the ways that platforms build or grow over time. It's a long game, it's a career long game. It's not something you're going to accomplish overnight. But I think often when people discuss platform, especially the mainstream media, so yeah, I'm thinking about everything from like the New York Times to Vox to, the BBC, whomever. You'll see these articles about how authors need to market and promote and be on TikTok or be on such and such social media platform. And they just really reduce it to being a dancing monkey. And that I don't think is what platform is at all. It's much more relationship driven and the quality of the relationships that you're building over time, whether that's with readers, with librarians and booksellers, with your peers and colleagues, organizations that you're affiliated with. All of these things contribute in a strong way to helping you launch a book. It's not just about posting on social media. It's that usually, in my experience, plays a small role in discoverability.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so that if you have a nonfiction book and you are going to try for a major publisher, one of the big five, are they going to be looking at social media, whether it is the most significant platform or not, and look
Right.
for a certain number? Like, are they going to want 100,000 followers or whatever?
They might tell you that kind of number to scare you off and get you to leave them alone. They like to do that. Uh, they will look at the numbers, but only as a shortcut. It's a signal, but it doesn't say everything that they might want to know or need to know, because you can. I mean, let's be honest here. You can generate a really significant social media following by buying followers. That is still possible. People still do it. I think it's a waste of time and money, but there are people who will do that. Publishers can tell, like, if the numbers are meaningless, they're really looking for engagement. And I know that word has gotten used so often, I think it's lost meaning. But it's about the quality of the interactions you're having, and I would boil it down to, if you say something or post something on social media, is anyone paying attention? Does word spread? Do people want to interact with you? Do the conversations you initiate, are they having an effect on the community? So that's what publishers are looking for. And you can have an effect with a very small following. You may have influencers or people with bigger platforms than you who, if they're engaging with you, will draw a lot of attention. So if they see publishers, agents, if they see that you have connections that are valuable in that way, it's not going to matter that much to them what your numbers look like, because they know you can just dial up Oprah, like the Oprah
Mm,
effect. I'm not saying they're looking for Oprah, but just as a shorthand for, some people
right.
who can move the needle.
That's code.
Yes, code.
Got it. You mentioned AI earlier, and you said we could come back to it. Let's. What should authors be aware of today?
So the ship has sailed on the model training. And by that, I mean, there's so many people angry and upset, and they want to know how to protect their work. How can I stop the companies from stealing my work? It's already done. I'm not saying you shouldn't be upset, but there is literally no productive thing you can do to protect your work at this point that your publisher or any partners aren't already doing. So I feel like I need to lift that burden for people. Like, all of the sins that have been committed are basically in the past at this point. And so what's happening now is that there are lawsuits from every direction, like every media company you can imagine, from the movie studios to the music companies to the New York Times. I could go on. They're all suing, right? Um,
And
and some
settling. Didn't the
and
Times
settling.
just reach a deal? Yeah.
Yes. So we're starting to see settlements now. So what does that mean? It means remedies are being put in place. It means that there will be payment, restitution, and moving forward, there are going to be licensing deals most likely. These are already being made. OpenAI, which is perhaps the most well-known and biggest of the AI model companies, they have been making huge licensing deals, multi-million dollar licensing deals. HarperCollins has made licensing deals for titles on its backlist, and authors had an opportunity to get paid $2,500 per title. HarperCollins also took $2,500. So it was a $5,000 fee per title. You could say no as the author, but you could also say yes. So that's going to be the path forward as I see it. Now, there's a small chance, or maybe it's a bigger chance, I'm not a lawyer, that the courts will say, well, all this training is fair use and no one has to pay anything. We'll see. So I feel like I always have to get that out of the way first before talking about the rest of AI, because I know there is so much anger as well as confusion about what's going on and if it's legal. For the most part, the tools are being operated legally, even if the training that was done in the past was not legal. Again, the courts will have to decide.
Thank you. What do you see? You mentioned trends in the kinds of books being published. What about format? Are mass market paperbacks going away?
Yes.
Oh, that was
Yes.
easy.
Yeah, that was very easy. So, it's been like a death by a thousand cuts. There are just so many things that have led up to this moment. It's not all just one factor, but multiple factors. Like mass merchandisers such as Target really shrunk their book sections. The cost of paper and printing has gone up. There's ebooks that ultimately have replaced in some ways the mass market paperback, in a lot of ways rather. So when you start adding up all of these effects, you have the loss of the mass market paperback. You'll still see them being done in 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 corners, but they're just too expensive of a format to keep going, especially when there are fewer places to sell them, and ebooks can offer a better value for the money. Um, so yeah, I don't know that it would change how an author thinks about their work, how it pitches their work, or how they pitch their work. I guess on the upside, what we're seeing is publishers and self-publishing authors alike are doing really well with deluxe editions. So if you look at,
What
in
is
fact,
that? What is a deluxe edition?
so a deluxe edition is something that it's often a limited edition. So you have to buy it now. It's not going to exist in the future. Um, it's just a really tricked out edition, like it's sprayed edges, the foil stamping, there's some sort of special artwork, it may come with some extras of some kind. Those are publishers and authors alike are charging a premium for those, and if you look at Rebecca Yarros, the second book in her series, when it was released, I wanna say it was January or February, her publisher is Entangled. When the publisher they had a deluxe edition and a hardcover edition, like a normal edition, both releasing in conjunction, and the deluxe edition outsold the hardcover 2 to 1.
Wow.
People were willing to pay more. I think Book
Isn't
Talk.
that interesting?
Yeah. Yeah, it's people who love that author or that series, they want this special thing.
Yeah.
And we're talking about $30 and up for these books. So that's the direction the market is going at the moment. I don't know how long that gravy train will last, but I think there's always gonna be room for the deluxe edition, and it was probably under leveraged.
And are hardbacks going to stay the standard if mass market is going away?
Hardcovers have seen growth most recently, so even though, you know, I know there's a lot of concern about the economy and what's going on, with tariffs and all the rest of it, but it hasn't really affected the market for more expensive hardcover editions, whether it's deluxe or not. But I think in the US, what's this is where I have to be really specific. This is a US this is a US thing where people are willing to pay more for hardcovers. willing to buy the hardcovers. I'm not saying that there isn't a segment of the US market that doesn't buy paperbacks or that doesn't wait for the paperback release. But if you go to a different market like the UK, for example, they treat all of this a little bit differently. That it's much more likely to have a trade paperback original. That means like a higher quality trade paperback and dispense with the hardcover because it's just a more price sensitive market.
Wow.
It was one of the CEOs, I think it was James Daunt. I can't remember, but at an industry event, someone asked this question about, why don't you have more hardcover sales in the UK, or why don't you have more something to do with hardcovers? And he says, because Americans are richer. That's why we sell more hardcovers in the US.
Oh, that's funny. My new book is coming out in hardcover, not trade. I was surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. And audio simultaneously, by the way, everyone.
Yes. Yes. Very important format.
Yeah. What is going on with audio in general?
It keeps growing. It had double-digit growth last year, which is really for me, it's astonishing because it has had double-digit growth since roughly 2012 to 2013. The year prior in 2023, it was single-digit growth, and now it's back to double-digit growth. So I thought, this wasn't gonna last. Like in 2016, 2017, I remember reporting, "How long will we have this irrational exuberance?" But it
What a
just keeps
great term.
going. Yeah. Uh, I think there are several factors here. Um, the biggest is likely Spotify. They entered the audiobook market in late 2023, and they used a different model. It wasn't a credit model as Audible uses. And it sort of allowed people to experiment a little more freely about what they wanted to listen to without being penalized. Oh, I spent my credit and I'm stuck with this book. Or people trying to find the credit worthy book to get from Audible didn't have that problem in Spotify, especially since they were giving you 15 listening hours if you were on their premium plan. So you didn't have to pay any extra money to test the waters. And we'll see how this plays out over time. I think that's really important to say because I have no idea what sort of deals Spotify struck with the big publishers to get all their titles into the catalog. And those contracts are coming up for renewal later this year, and we'll see what happens. I'm sure they were given very advantageous terms by Spotify to get in the door. But so far, the point I wanted to make is that it doesn't seem to be cannibalizing the market for other things, like other editions, other formats, other retailers. It's almost as if Spotify is reaching people who might not have otherwise put their money into audiobooks or given it a shot. Again, it is really early, and I think we have to see how this plays out, but so far the news is really positive. And it looks too like the children's market, if there are any children's writers here, that's starting to take off more in audio because previously I mentioned the credit-worthy problem. Children's books, a lot of people don't want to spend their credit on a really short children's book. And so it really had depressed
Yeah.
audio uptake.
Mhm.
But again, that's changing. Audible is looking at different ways to make those more appealing um, when having to deal with the credit model or the pricing.
My niece is a social psychologist, a professor at UT Austin, and her son is not a reader. It's just not what and he will listen to audiobooks indefinitely. Those are great. And she can't stand it. she, she, she like, he has to hold a book, he has to read. And it's, I have no point.
Yeah.
I wonder if you allow kids to listen to audiobooks, is that in fact going to inhibit their learning to read?
I don't think so. I think it's a bright spot for publishers. You know, I d- One of the concerns over the last few years coming out of the pandemic has been the decline in reading for especially in that middle school age range. There's also something called the decline by nine. That's 9 years old. It's a pronounced effect that when kids get to about that age, they stop reading for enjoyment.
Oh,
So
hmm.
there's hope that audiobooks can I shouldn't use the word rescue, but in some regards, rescue their attention from other things and get them invested in authors and storytelling, and also get them away from screens. Certainly
Yeah.
depends on what sort of audiobook we're talking about and how they're listening to the audiobook. But there are actually devices that parents can buy for their kids that you buy cards that you put into like a device and it plays the audiobook from that card. So you don't have to hand your kid like an iPad or an iPhone. You have this device for listening.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to be, next time we talk, you'll give me the update on that one. Um, I think, John, at this point, I'd love to open it up to audience questions.
You in the queue here. Someone wanted to know, is there any more interest than there used to be among publishers in stories set in Canada by Canadian authors?
Oh, sure. If we're talking about Canadian publishers, they love that. They want Canadian authors and they want books set in Canada. But if you're saying, is there more of a demand from that from US publishers? I don't think there's any more demand from that than there would be for books set in other countries. So it just really depends on what imprint we're talking about, what they're known for. Certainly there are I it I shouldn't go down that path because my memory is too bad, but I feel like there is, like, a Canadian romances that are set in the country, and that's, like, a thing. But I don't remember enough details to, like, give you an author name or a title. Maybe someone in the chat can comment, especially Canadians.
Oh, and
Um
yeah, let's not forget Louise Penny, right?
Right,
Canadian
of
author,
course, Louise
set
Penny.
in Canada, American
Yes.
publisher.
Yes. The only thing to keep in mind about any of this is that the biggest Canadian publishers, I think, are owned by US publishers. Um, but certainly, if you look at the Canadian bookselling community, if you look at the environment right now in Canada, everyone wants to support Canadians and not buy things that are of US origin. So
There
make
you
of
go.
that what you will.
John?
Okay. Someone asks, with the self-publishing with an agent trend, does that make it easier or harder to get agents these days than it used to be?
I think it's neither easy nor hard, but I will say that it's never been easy to secure an agent for a book you've already self-published unless it is selling really well. So usually what happens is the authors who are succeeding independently get approached by agents who are constantly looking for people to sell rights for. There are certain agents who specialize in that. They're not a lot. I would say half a dozen agencies who love to sell rights for indie authors because there's such a big market for it. So you will likely be approached. You won't have to do any work yourself. I have never recommended pitching a self-published book to an agent though, unless you have a real track record of success to share.
Thank you.
Okay. Someone said, we've mentioned a lot of genres here, but are thrillers still popular or are they declining?
Oh, they're still as popular as ever. Frida McFadden. Just look at her. She's a self-published author, actually, who works with source books to do the print editions. And I think she also occasionally will just self-publish a book in all formats because she can, and because it's, maybe not worth source books being in on that. So yeah, there's plenty of thriller activity. Thriller is not going away.
Why would it not be worth source books time or effort for this one, but for others it is?
The book I'm thinking of is one she did, I wanna say it was in the fall. It was a little novella, and it almost felt like a little joke. Like, she was parodying herself. So it was supposed to be comical or satirical of her own work, and I think she did it as just I can't look into her soul and say why she did it, but it looked like she did it for fun for the readers who really enjoy her and could pick up on the jokes.
Got it. Like a little Easter egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
John?
Someone says, if you tie your book into the zeitgeist of what's going on while you're writing it, how do you balance that with the risk that it would be dated by the time it makes it through the publishing chain?
Well, I suppose when I talk about the zeitgeist, I'm referring to things that are not going to they're not flash in the pan sorts of things. So, for example, if we look at the political situation we're in, I think will persist for at least 3.5 years in the United States. So that gives you plenty of time to tie into the themes that concern us. And there are other things like environmental concerns. Like there are people like there's actually kind of a I hesitate to call it a subgenre, and I really don't like the name, but cli-fi, has anyone heard of cli-fi? Climate fiction? That ties into the zeitgeist. So the things that I'm really referring to, it's not like momentary, it's something has some legs to it.
Bigger trend. Cli-fi, perfect for an anti-hero.
Yes, yes,
Just saying.
absolutely.
Okay. Someone asks, with the rise in self-publishing and the popularity in audiobooks, do we see that changing story lengths at all?
Oh, interesting. I don't I don't know. I mean, the what I typically hear, and here I have to just full disclosure, I'm not an audiobook listener myself, so everything I talk about and relates to audiobooks is for reporting, hearing what the experts say and what consumers experience. So this is not anecdotal. But with the credit model, and I think this is important, with the credit model, people tend to go for the longest book possible because it's more listening time for the same amount of money. And so originally what we saw with audiobooks, and this still persists, it hasn't gone away, is that people like epic sorts of books, science fiction and fantasy epics, things that are in a series, because especially if they have long car trips, this helps fill all of the time that they have to spend. Um, but it's certainly true when you start looking at the Spotify model. Especially when people start getting into nonfiction listening, they only may wanna listen to a chapter here and a chapter there, the chapters that are of highest interest to them rather than going into the whole book. So I do know that one of the key ways that they search and filter for audiobooks, this has been confirmed by studies from the Audiobook Publishers Association, they will search by length. So I think it just depends on, let's say, the problem to be solved. When people go to look for an audiobook, is it for a car trip? Is it for winding down before bedtime, which people do use audio for that? Is it for their hour walk in the evening? So yeah, I don't. I think the best answer is that outside of the credit model, all lengths become marketable.
Yeah. My my contracts got longer. Excuse me. When I first started writing the Josie Prescott Antiques Mystery Series, my books were the contracts were about 80,000 words, 82,000, like that.
Mhm.
And by the number 14, it was 90.
Yeah, yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
Maybe that's why.
Okay. People said, I and other writers I've met lately are retirees who always wanted to write. Since we don't exactly have a lifetime career worth of writing time ahead of us, do you have any suggestions about how to get published as an older author and what to give our time and energy to?
The good news about publishing is that it's one of the few industries in which no one has to see your face in order to enjoy your work. I'm not saying that it's not ageist or that there can't be ageist attitudes. I think that's just a societal or cultural phenomenon that can't help but touch publishing. But I do find publishing unique in that people really do pay attention to what's on the page or the marketability of the story or the book. And they tend to have less concern about how old is that author because they need to be able to pump out 5 more books before they're in the coffin. Like, I don't think that's how editors and agents think. And also publishing I'm speaking with some ignorance because I don't study other industries, but I do feel like in publishing, people tend to stay in their jobs until they die or they are pushed out because of a restructuring or, the corporate machine pushes them out. But it's not typically because of age, it's just because of all other sorts of reasons. Um, some of the most storied editors and agents, that you can think of, they just kept going and going. Maybe they had teams who took care of a lot of work, but they were still in decision maker and tastemaker roles. So I say that as reassurance. Um, there are also lots of young people in publishing too, and if you get an agent as a new author, they are likely to be very, very, very young. There's no denying that. But I still think that the decision is made on the basis of the manuscript, and no one thinks. I feel like no one is acquiring books with the expectation that there has to be a certain number after that. In fact, I think that publishing is very much wait and see. Let's see how the first book performs before we really commit to another, or let's see how the first two do before we commit to another. So I don't think you're going to be evaluated on how many books you have in you, unless, of course, you're proposing something that has to be a 12-book series and you're 80 years old. Then there's going to be some concerns.
Alan Bradley published Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie when he was 72 years old, the first in his still ongoing series.
Yeah, I can point to so many examples of authors who their first book came out at a more advanced age. So Delia Owens is one example. Who is the author of the oh, Lessons in Chemistry? Bonnie Garmis.
Mhm.
She was
You
well
know,
into her
the
60s.
original question was where should you focus your time? And I'll just add, and I think this is a truism for all of us in writing the best book you can.
Yeah.
That's cream rises to the top.
Okay.
And I
Since we are
want to
coming up
say,
on the 2 o'clock mark,
you read my mind, John.
yeah, uh, we're glad to stay and answer questions until around 2:10, 2:15. But since some of you will have to leave right at 2, we wanted to thank you all for attending today's discussion and remind you that if you have any questions remaining in the queue that aren't specifically applicable to Jane Friedman, that we might use them for Ask Jane YouTube shorts, quick 1 to 3 minute videos that answer a critical question about writing, let you get back to work. You can find those at janecleland.com/YouTube. If you'd like to see any of Jane Friedman's books, newsletters, and just endless resources that she makes available, you can find those at janefriedman.com. And also, this discussion will appear as a replay on Jane Cleland's YouTube channel as well in about a week, is about how long it usually takes to get these live. And if you enjoyed today's webinar and would like to join us in the future, we'd love to see you at a future event. Currently, there are events planned through September with more to come. You can find a full list at janecleland.com/events. And Jade Friedman also has a huge list of both free and paid events on her website as well. Is there anything either of you would like to add for anyone who has to leave in the next couple of minutes?
Yeah, I'm going to give Jane Friedman the last moment to say goodbye we'll continue, but for this little section. But I want to say, and don't forget to get her book, The Business of Being a Writer, second edition from the University of Chicago Press. Um, she's a treasure. Buy the book. And for those of you who do have to leave, I hope you find great strength and solace from reading and writing. And Jane, you get the last word right now, and then we'll continue with a couple more questions.
I was just going to say, even for those who don't want to buy the book or can't because of budgetary reasons, there are so many free resources at the book's website. That's businessofwriting.org. So at least, avail yourself of some of the resources. It's under the supplemental resource tab. Lots of query letter examples, book proposal examples, and other documents that might be useful to everyone on the business of writing.
That is so great. And thank you. That's great. All right, John.
Okay. Someone asks, beyond actual book sales, what are the most promising alternative incomes you're seeing writers successfully develop in 2025?
Substack is the big one. And I, I hesitate to even say it because it's not that I recommend people go out and start a Substack. It's a very crowded pool. It's hard to stand out, but that's true of any media where people are all, trying to compete to earn a little bit of money. That said, it's a really interesting tool for thinking differently about how you might make money through your writing. I think it makes a lot more sense for nonfiction writers, generally speaking, but you'll find many novelists who are successful on Substack in getting people to pay them a little money. Sometimes it's done on what I would call a patronage system. So, in other words, all of their Substack content is free, whether you pay or not. Everyone gets to enjoy it. And then people who want to support the writer will then pay and you know, have the good karma of supporting a writer. Then there are others, it's more transactional, and so some things are paywalled, there are perks you're not gonna get if you don't pay. And, that, of course, describes what I do with one of my newsletters. It's not on Substack, but it operates on a similar model where there is a free version, but if you want the real nitty-gritty business analysis, you're gonna have to pay the annual fee in order to get it. So that's a big that the email newsletter or Substack, that's a big source of income for all sorts of writers that, like, as far as if you look at the writing related income, it can be very significant. Similarly, some folks are very skilled at getting ads, sponsors, people to pay them to have placements in those newsletters, or if they have a podcast as part of the podcast. Um, but of course, you need usually some sort of established audience in order to get that ad or sponsorship money. Speaking for myself again, I do have ads that run in my newsletters. So I get both subscriber money from the paid newsletter and some ad money from those placements. Some writers will have a Patreon. I find that this is popular among people who have a lot of short works or they're very productive generally, and they just have a lot that they can offer an established fan base on an ongoing basis. You don't have to be prolific, but I do find that people with a lot of short stories, novellas, things that are on, let's say, their backlist, they're able to get their fans to commit. And then they throw in some sort of interaction that's exclusive just for their Patreon community, like monthly Zooms like this one, or some other kind of, high touch interaction. Teaching, of course, has always, I think, been part of writers' incomes. Right now, I would say people are chasing, in a good way, like online teaching, things that there are fewer costs, and you can potentially reach even more people than you would in person. Because full-time teaching, tenured teaching positions have really declined in years, I find that that just creates a lot more interest across the board for the online teaching opportunities. And they're everywhere. There are some people who offer their own, like I do. There are some people who will partner with organizations like Poets and Writers or Writers Digest. And of course, you can do both. You don't have to be exclusive one way or the other. Um, and I think I'll cut it off there. Those are the big ones, but certainly my book actually goes into detail about the various ways that this works, and people tend to diversify um, in order to, ensure that if one type of work or one revenue stream dries up, they still have something else to fall back on or to develop.
How do you decide what to pursue? Do you have a decision-making model that you use when you are going to start a new revenue stream?
It's more gut instinct, I would say, based on what I'm seeing in the market, what I'm drawn to do, what people have asked for. But you have to be really careful here. For example, I can't tell you how many people have said, I wish you would start a podcast.
Mhm, mhm.
I find podcasts, well, first of all, I'm not a podcast listener. And I think there's a bit of danger in trying to launch something that you're not an avid consumer of. Yes, you can do it and you can be successful at it, but if you don't already enjoy and consume it, I think it makes your success that much less likely. The other thing about people telling me to start a podcast is it's really hard to monetize a podcast. It is a lot of work to do a good podcast that anyone wants to listen to. And so I know the time commitment involved and I see the potential money involved at least early on and it's like that's not worth it to me. So I am more than happy to appear on other people's podcasts, show up as a guest, and just wash my hands of the effort involved in actually running one. Now, that's not to say I might not do one in the future, but right now the time commitment is just, I can't even begin to think about it. I personally have always been drawn to actually writing things. I like to write. So I focus on how to monetize the writing. And I really like email. I have liked emails, going back 15 or 20 years. Um, and so for me, it was a no-brainer to try and monetize email because I could do that. It's sustainable for me. I can do that until I retire, until I die. I will never get tired of sending emails. And anyone who's watched my career probably knows that. They would be able to say it without me telling them that's where my interest lies. So I do think you need to balance what you are innately attracted to and what you think you can sustain versus what are the market conditions, what's easier, more difficult to monetize, what sort of challenge are you setting for yourself?
So helpful. You're just a fount of knowledge and insights. You're
Thank
great.
you.
Excellent. Someone said, since romance is so huge in the emergence of romantasy,
Oh,
should I add romance to my thriller novel or other genre?
not necessarily. You have to really want to do it. Like my concern when people ask questions like this is people can tell when you're just doing it for market purposes and your heart's not really in it. So just make sure you're actually drawn to creating the romance. Certainly, romance has infiltrated a lot of different genres. Like fantasy would be like the best example I could offer because we now have romantasy, which did not exist a few years ago. But notice there are still fantasies that are not romantasy. So it's really up to you. I will say that I have met so many authors over the years who hit their heads against the wall trying to write something they thought was prestigious or that would get them acclaim. Um, Sometimes these people come out of MFA programs. Sometimes they're just being really self-serious. And then they decide to take a break and, oh, I'm just going to write this little fluffy romance. And maybe I'll make some money doing it. That they approach it from maybe a tiny bit of cynicism. Um, and what they find out is that actually romances are challenging to write well. And they also often find they love doing it because it's so much more fun than what they had been doing. I've seen that play out again and again and again. And in fact, this is a very timely question given what I published at my site the other day. I just had a guest post from someone talking about how writing romance made them more creative because of the restrictions on what they could do with the story. And what everyone knows, there's going to be a happily ever after. So where does the surprise come from? Where does the tension come from? And so she talks about that in the post about how this has actually been really great for her writing practice is to figure
Yeah,
this out.
fabulous. I think we have time for one more, John.
Okay, if we have time for one more, let's go with what's one piece of conventional wisdom about the writing business you see often today that you think writers should question or abandon entirely?
Oh gosh. Um, there's there's so many to choose from. Trying to think what would be the best one to end on. Um, I'll talk about the word balance, and I hope I haven't used it prior. I may have used it just recently about balancing income streams or something, but I'm often asked a lot, how do you balance art and business? Or how do you find that balance? Or um, how do you balance work or paying work with the creative side, et cetera? These sorts of questions. I think maybe people ask me because they feel like I've achieved this balance somehow, like I appear like a healthy, well-adjusted money earning person. So I've figured out the balance. I don't think balance, I think that that word is misleading. Think about alignment instead, because I would look at my life and say, there is nothing about my life that's balanced in a way that I think other people would enjoy. It is over indexed on business. I get so much enjoyment out of my work. It is 80% of my life. And I think if other people implemented that percentage, it would not work. I don't have any kids. I don't have ailing relatives to take care of. I don't have obligations outside of my own interests, really. And I've even, folded my husband into my business. So that kind of gives you a sense of how anything in my orbit, even if it's more personal, suddenly becomes more business oriented. So just to say, there's no balance here, but there is alignment. So there's alignment in what I value and the sorts of work that I do, what I say yes to, um, how much money is enough, how I want to spend my time. And I don't think enough people ask or consider it a business question. And I think it's a very deep business question. What what is it that you want to stand for? What do you want to be known for? And then how are you going to engage in activities that reinforce what you want to be known for? There's so many people out there chasing their tails on social media, for example, or following advice that's not really for them because they feel like, well, that's how that successful person did it, so that must be the answer. But it's not in alignment with their goals. So these are difficult questions. Like you could spend a lifetime answering them. But that's what I would urge is don't assume that the business is about the numbers. I think it's about um, aligning your values and your purpose with your business activities.
Wow. Thank you. That's a wonderful way to end. It is so helpful, I think. This has been very, very special, Jane. Thank you very much.
My
Best of luck with the
pleasure.
book. Look forward to talking to you again soon on something or other. And for everyone out there, thank you for spending part of your weekend with us. And I look forward to seeing you all again. And really, I do hope you find great strength and solace from reading and writing. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you.